Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the north shore of Skilak Lake on the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. As we've reported on a few attacks in this area recently, it is a location with a developing conflict between people and bears. The Cook Inlet surges twice a day with millions of gallons of seawater, and in summer it carries with it salmon, among other species, that predators feed upon. The flat sloping forests along the inlet rise to hills and then to mountains within 30 miles of the shores. This increase in elevation amounts to about 1 mile in gain and creates different forest zones and characteristics. The streams and creeks created by this gain allow migrating salmon to procreate and continue their species, as well as many others. The birch, hemlock, and spruce trees are the backdrop of a colorful palette augmented by animals like moose, hares, and squirrels. These animals are pursued by black bears, coyotes, lynx, wolves, and brown bears. At the northeast corner of Skilak Lake, Doroshin Bay opens up to a small valley. The slopes on either side of the bay are forested, but the valley bottom is grassy and swampy. The lake's waters saturate the soil in the valley, creating a damp and muddy environment known as muskeg, just the kind of place that moose like to inhabit. On Tuesday, September 22nd, 2015, 47-year-old Gregory Matthews was hunting for moose with his brother Roger. They'd spent some time planning this hunt from their homes in Plano, Texas, and had planned to hunt together utilizing a moose call. They practiced calling for moose and helped each other improve their grunts and moans before traveling to Alaska. After boating their way to the north shore of Skilak Lake, the men decided to grunt for moose overlooking the grassy meadow along the valley bottom. If they managed to get a reply from an interested moose, they may be able to see it coming from a few hundred yards away. The requirements for a legal moose harvest in Alaska requires hunters to ensure the width of the bull's antlers as well as the number of brow tines. Shooting one that doesn't meet these requirements can get you into big trouble, even if it isn't a trophy animal. As the hunters spaced themselves out about 40 yards apart from one another, they prepared to grunt for moose. To do this, a tool similar in appearance to a bugle is used as a sound amplification device. A hunter places the smaller end toward their mouth, and the larger end they point in the direction from which they hope moose will answer. The hunter then makes a deep "mwah" sound. It doesn't sound very loud when it's heard, but the antlers of the moose act like a satellite dish, amplifying the sound they receive to their ears. Bull moose can hear each other from a few miles away if the conditions are right. The men set up with Gregory being positioned between his brother and the moose's anticipated approach. Roger would grunt and groan, drawing the moose in his direction and right past his brother's concealed location. This arrangement keeps the lovesick bull's attention on a different place than Gregory's hideout. As Roger grunted and groaned, the sounds of his make-believe moose moans drew the attention of more than the moose in the area. The expectation of a lovesick bull's response was cover for the approach of a predator less lovesick and more hungry. Gregory scanned the brush and hoped to hear the plodding steps and deep grunts of a moose as it approached him. Instead, he witnessed the bushes rustling only 20 yards from him. He watched in horror as a huge sow grizzly and her half-grown cubs stepped out. It was clear to Gregory that the grizzly had come in to find what she thought was a rutting bull moose. She came in expecting to find a prey animal she was accustomed to hunting, and when she fixed her gaze on Gregory, it became clear she had the same intention with him. As the sow slowly stepped toward Gregory, he yelled at her and threw up his hunting rifle. He fired at her, and the bullet struck the grizzly in the jaw, but did nothing to stop her stalk toward him. The sow broke into a quick trot toward Gregory as he tried to work the action on his rifle again. The sow closed in on him so quickly that the only thing he could do was shove the barrel of his gun into her mouth. She shook her head until she dislodged the rifle barrel and proceeded once again toward Gregory. The sow was now within biting range of Gregory, and as she plowed into him, she knocked him to the ground. She wasted no time in latching her canines onto Gregory's head. She drove her teeth through his scalp and into his skull bones. Gregory instinctively raised his left arm above his head to protect his neck from the bear's jaws. As he did this, the sow clamped down on it and gave Gregory a good shake. The sow sunk her teeth deep into the tissues on Gregory's back and lifted him off the ground a few times, slamming him down after each one. Roger, having now heard Gregory yell and the grizzly roar as the attack commenced, came to his brother's aid. He could see the grizzly sow swatting and snapping at his brother. He immediately drew down on the bear's shoulder with his 300 Win mag. Roger let it rip twice with his hunting rifle and watched as the sow disappeared into the brush before the report from his rifle stopped echoing through the valley. Just for the record, I hunt with a 300 Win mag, and it is my most preferred hunting rifle for any big game. I've dropped a Shiras moose in Idaho in its tracks from 80 yards with this rifle, and its power brings a humane ending to any game animal's life, even without perfect shot placement sometimes. After the grizzly dashed back into the brush, Roger helped Gregory back to his feet, and with their heads on a swivel, they made their way toward the boat. They didn't have any way to reach out for help and rested along the shore hoping for some kind of intervention. Only a few minutes passed before the sound of a boat motor broke the silence in desperation. As the Matthews brothers eagerly watched a boat rapidly approach their location, they waved their arms and yelled to make sure the boat didn't pass them by. The fishermen pulled near the brothers, and the Matthews boys informed them about the bear attack. The fishermen agreed to try to get cell phone service toward the middle of the lake and sped off. As they reached the middle of Skilak Lake, their call to 911 got through at 6:15 p.m., and a Life Med helicopter was dispatched to pick up the hunters. Gregory was flown to Central Peninsula Hospital in Soldotna for initial treatment of his wounds. He was said to be in good condition the day after the attack. The following day, Roger returned to the location of the bear attack and guided a biologist through what had occurred. They searched the area looking for evidence of what had happened to the bear and carried their firearms at the ready. After searching the perimeter of the attack site, the sow's dead carcass was located. She had made it about 100 yards after being shot by Roger. The authorities then began to consider the location and fate of the cubs. Based on the brothers' description, they decided the cubs were at least 2 years of age. They looked over the sow and could see that she was no longer lactating, meaning that she was no longer nursing them. The cubs had been eating food that she had foraged with them and had learned by now what to eat. After a few more searches for the cubs yielded nothing, the authorities gave up looking for them. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game required that the Matthews brothers complete paperwork describing the circumstances of the attack. They also collected the salvageable parts of the sow's carcass. State biologist Jeff Loringer stated that there was a marked uptick in bear attacks around the refuge in 2015. This channels recent episodes on Danny High and Gabrielle Markle, each happened the same fall as the attack on the Matthews brothers. He indicated that the main reason for this was the fact that more people than ever are accessing remote areas. Before these 3 attacks, all occurring within 7 weeks of one another, it had been nearly 3 years since a brown bear attack on the peninsula. Each of the attacks in 2015 around Skilak Lake and the Kenai River were deemed defensive attacks. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think Gregory would have been killed by this grizzly if his brother hadn't shot her? Did the cubs learn to stay away from humans? Is it the bear's fault when they attack people appearing in areas they've not previously been seen in much? If a big old sow grizzly appeared 20 yards from you, what would you do to ensure your safety? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Kodiak Lake on the northern side of Kodiak Island, Alaska. This lake is only 3 miles from our episode regarding the 5 brown bears that attacked Michael Snowden and Jeff Ostrin we covered a little while ago. The giant bears of Kodiak Island can clearly be aggressive toward people and are known for their size and demeanor. Kodiak Lake is located at around 76 feet in elevation and is covered in a dense mat of alder and grasses. The land is sloping up toward the middle of the island, but still low in elevation even at the peaks. Kodiak River enters the lake at the south and flows toward the north and enters Kodiak Bay opposite Sally Island. These water bodies teem with salmon in parts of the summer, drawing brown bears for miles from the surrounding area. On Kodiak Island, Sitka black-tailed deer are plentiful and wary, making them a great source of game for hunters. According to biologists, the deer are not native to this area, but migrated up as glaciers retreated about 8,100 years ago. They subsist by browsing on plant stems and grasses and easily swim to nearby islands whenever they need to. Deer and bears have been hunted by humans here for eons, and traditionally, indigenous hunters would leave the heads of bears behind as a spiritual tribute to the animals. They would use most other parts of the bears. This relationship has existed in a delicate balance that leads all species to sustain their existence in an interdependent cycle of predators and prey. On Friday, November 3rd of 1988, this cycle was spinning another revolution as 38-year-old Dwayne Christensen and Bill Burgess stalked blacktails while trying to avoid the brown bears that were doing the same thing, for the same reasons. Christensen lived in Fairbanks and was an avid outdoorsman. Their hunting trip had been uneventful to this point, at least as uneventful as hunting on the giant bear's turf can be. Burgess was the first of the hunters to find success and shot a deer that the men had soon found dead in the grass. He quickly cut the animal open and began to pull the entrails from its carcass. The scent of fresh blood and body fluids from the deer wafted onto the breeze. Typically, as one hunter guts the deer, the other stands guard over his partner. The bears on Kodiak Island are known for their keen sense of smell and aggressive approach to claiming gut piles and even carcasses from hunters. They've been known to listen for the report of hunting rifles and converge on the area in search of deer meat, frequently causing altercations with hunters. Burgess began processing the deer by removing its organs to help preserve the meat from rot. As discussed previously, this involves at least one of the hunters focusing on cutting the deer open from its ribcage to its lower abdomen. As you can imagine, this creates an environment filled with the scent of blood and deer body fluids that the big bears find nearly irresistible. As Christensen stood watch over his hunting partner, Burgess quickly pulled the entrails from the deer he had harvested. The men knew that they wanted to be as far away from the remains as possible if any bears did appear, to claim whatever was left over. Some hunters can gut a deer in about 6 minutes, and even this is too slow to escape the brown bears on occasion. Christensen decided that he could see better from the top of the hill, and started to climb his way through the brush. Along his way he saw a deer that was within reach of his rifle. He quickly shot the buck and watched it dash into the brush, leaving a blood trail through the grass for a few hundred yards. As he followed the blood trail, he could see the drops in big splotches along the deer's path. At about 100 yards down the blood trail, he could see the body of the deer, lying dead in the grass. Now all he had to do was gut the deer, and the two hunters could drag their carcasses back to camp. Christensen unsheathed his knife and bent over the deer as he positioned himself to gut it. Suddenly a low rumbling growl sent a shiver down his spine. He stood to his full height and saw a huge sow brown bear and 2 cubs beside her, only 15 yards away. The 3 bears were straddling the buck's blood trail and had followed it right to Christensen's location. As soon as they locked eyes, the sow dug her paws into the soil as she started her initial leap toward him. Christensen raised his hands above his head and yelled at the bear, but she didn't slow down. The brush popped and bowed as she plowed her way through it in a straight line toward him. He knew he had no choice but to defend himself. He raised his rifle and quickly fired a deafening shot at her head. His aim was true enough, as his bullet struck the sow directly through her eye, but she didn't miss a step. Before he could work the action on his rifle to load the next round, the sow had closed in on him. The bear swatted him and sent him flying backward and onto his back. Somehow Christensen maintained his grip on his hunting rifle, but had no chance to fire a second round before the bear knocked him down. Christensen yelled and scrambled around, trying to regain his feet. The sow didn't hesitate in her unrelenting attack on him. She plowed into him again and flattened him with his face in the grass. Now at the mercy and whim of the sow, each painful bite caused Christensen to jerk and scream in reaction. He lost his grip on his hunting rifle during the attack and could only stare into the eyes of the hungry and now wounded bear only a few feet from him. By now Burgess had heard the bear's roar and his partner's screams. He covered the short distance as quickly as he could to a point where he could see Christensen and the bears. He briefly watched as the bear and his hunting partner tumbled around and moved himself into a better position for a shot. Burgess knew he could easily wound his partner while attempting to save his life, so lining himself up for a safe shot at the bear was critical. He watched as the bear repeatedly bit Christensen in the thighs and buttocks. Enormous wounds were opened up in his hunting partner's body as Burgess's ears filled with Christensen's screams. Burgess lifted his deer hunting rifle, and as the sow stood to her hind feet, he fired a second shot into the bear. His bullet struck home and took the fight out of the bear. She slumped over and tossed her head in the uncoordinated throes of death. Christensen now lay on the ground with the bear right next to him. He could see the bear was much larger than he was, and was in awe of its muscular and powerful build. The bear measured just over 8 feet tall and weighed in at 750 pounds. Her 2 cubs from the previous year wandered around the area, but didn't demonstrate any aggression towards the men. Now severely wounded, Christensen was facing a bleak situation. The attack happened on Friday, and they had arrangements to be picked up on Saturday. That meant that he would have to wait for a day for rescue and medical attention, if they couldn't figure out how to get help before that. Once arrangements were made, he was flown to a medical center in the town of Kodiak before being transferred to Fairbanks for advanced treatment for his wounds. The sow was killed during the attack, and her cubs were not. The hunters indicated that the cubs stayed in the area and fed upon the deer carcass for a day or so before wandering off the next day. Their whereabouts were not known after Christensen was rescued, and there is no indication of efforts to locate them, or if those efforts were successful. Just a day before this attack, a man named Harley Siebenpiper was killed and partially eaten by a brown bear on Baranoff Island, a few hundred miles to the south. He was deer hunting as well, and was using a deer call, which was believed to be the cause of his attack. This episode is linked to in the video article below this video, so reviewing it and comparing the attacks will be easy for you, if you're interested in doing so. The similarities are eerie, and show you just how badly Christensen's attack could have ended if it wasn't for Burgess. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. What similarities do you see between the fatal bear attack on Siebenpiper and Christensen's mauling? Can deer hunters do anything to avoid being attacked by hungry brown bears? Was it easier for indigenous hunters to harvest deer given they didn't ring the dinner bell by using firearms? Or would the wounded animal's blood trail still bring in bears? What would go through your mind if you glanced up to see 3 huge Kodiak brown bears only 15 yards away from you as you stood over a bleeding deer? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Schrader Lakes area in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in northern Alaska. ANWR spreads for 19 million acres of the most diverse habitat in the Arctic region. The Brooks Range is an expansive chain of mountains that covers the Arctic areas of Alaska. Some peaks in the Brooks Range reach over 9,000 feet in elevation and are capped with ice and snow year-round. Dall sheep dance along the slippery icy slopes, and moose meander the Muskegon meadows. On the north slope, floods of melting snow carve deep valleys packed with poplar and spruce trees. This rush of clean, cold water allows seasonal salmon migrations, which bring nutrients to the ecosystem after their death. Most of the plant life here consists of low-growing bushes and willows, but a few tree species are hardy enough to hang on. Just north of Schrader Lakes, mountains give way to tundra with vast herds of caribou and bands of muskoxen. The predators in the Brooks Range include Arctic fox and red fox, coyotes, wolverines, and gray wolves, as well as all 3 species of bears in North America. Black bears, brown bears, and polar bears somehow eke out a living in this cold and seemingly inhospitable place. On August 4th, 1979, a trio of hikers was getting ready to break camp. Chad Hansen was a professor of Chinese philosophy from Vermont. Quinn and Patricia Whiting O'Keefe were his companions. Quinn was a medical doctor at the University of San Francisco, and Patricia was his devoted and doting wife and partner. In the previous days of their expedition, they had seen a lot of wildlife and unforgettable views. The valleys and slopes had offered their camera pictures that would be remembered for years to come. Herds of caribou thundered across the tundra, and moose peeked from behind small trees and bushes, making the hikers' experience inspiring and peaceful. One notable animal that they hadn't seen was suspiciously missing from their immersive experience in the backcountry. They knew that brown bears were commonplace in this environment, but somehow they had avoided seeing one so far. The hikers were not packing bear spray, given it was not invented yet, and had decided not to take any firearms along on their adventure. Patricia did have the forethought to adorn her backpack with bear bells, though, so the possibility of running into a bear had crossed their collective minds. As the trio hiked the rolling foothills, Patricia pulled ahead of the men by around 50 yards. She did not expect to run into bears, given they hadn't seen any to this point. As she topped a small rise and disappeared on the far side, the men climbed toward her location. Patricia crested the rise and walked down the slope several yards. Suddenly she heard a rustle in the brush nearby and glanced to see what the source of the sound could be. She was filled with terror as she saw a huge brown bear with her 3 cubs steaming toward her from only a few yards away. She could only scream before the sow closed in on her and had no time to do anything else before the bear dropped her with a single swat from her massive paw. With Patricia now out of sight, the men heard her scream in terror but couldn't see anything occurring. Quinn and Chad scrambled up the rise to find the sow and her 3 cubs disappearing as they ran away. A sudden rustle in the bushes to their right revealed another sow brown bear, with her 2 little cubs charging toward them in a bluff charge. The men backed down and allowed the sow space. She turned her cubs around and fled as quickly as the other bears had done. After avoiding the second sow's charge, Chad and Quinn searched for Patricia. They followed her moans to a spot just off the side of the trail. To this point, their attention was diverted by running into 7 brown bears within just a few seconds of each other, but now it was all directed to Patricia. Quinn bent down over his wife and was horrified to see how much damage the single swipe from the sow's claws had done to her beautiful face. He could tell by the damage done that the bear's paw had likely struck Patricia on her right temple area. The gashes across her face told the tale of the attack. Her nose was severed and dangled by a small piece of skin. Her scalp on the right side of her head had been sliced and hung attached to her only at the top. Furthermore, her right eye, the tissues, and the bones surrounding it were destroyed and misplaced. Patricia was conscious, though, but bleeding profusely. Quinn tried to put the severed portions of his wife's face back in place and applied pressure to her wounds to slow the bleeding. He and Chad briefly discussed how to get her help and agreed that the best strategy was for Chad to go. Quinn stayed behind, surrounded by 7 brown bears, with his bleeding and injured wife, while Chad ran toward the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office at Peters Lake. Chad made the 18-mile route in only 5 hours, across rolling tundra and through boggy muskeg. Upon his arrival, officers there tried to reach out to request a medical helicopter to Patricia's location. Severe weather had rolled in and prevented radio contact. Dr. Paul Fisher decided the best way to establish contact with the Prudhoe Bay-based medical service was to hop in the small airplane at the office and fly above the storm. He braved the dangerous weather and managed to establish contact to successfully order the medical helicopter's assistance. The helicopter was dispatched to rescue Patricia, but after flying over the area, couldn't locate her. They landed at the office and picked up Chad to have him show them where Patricia and Quinn were waiting. During the 7 hours following Patricia's attack, fog had settled in and closed visibility to under 25 feet. Quinn anticipated that the low visibility would prevent Patricia's rescue, so he quickly gathered wood to build a large fire. As Chad guided the helicopter crew to O'Keefe's location, the pilot spotted the signal fire glimmering through the fog. The helicopter pilot managed to land safely near the O'Keefes, and Patricia was loaded aboard. She was flown to a hospital in Fairbanks, where a trauma team awaited her arrival. They rushed her into surgery, and she endured 10 hours of emergency operations. Her wounds were cleaned and closed using sutures, and the rest of her body was examined for additional damage or wounds. The medical team discovered that her left eye had also been damaged by the bear's swat. Patricia's face was severely disfigured during the attack, but she was in stable condition. She had survived due to everyone involved executing a series of actions that ensured it. From Quinn's rendering of first aid to Chad's long run to the Fish and Wildlife Office, from Dr. Fisher's risky airplane flight to the helicopter pilot seeing Chad's rescue fire through the fog, each member of her rescue team executed their role flawlessly to save her life. Following Patricia being stabilized in Fairbanks, she was flown back to San Francisco for extended hospitalization there. She endured several surgical procedures to reconstruct her face, but refused to allow her experiences to keep her from enjoying the backcountry. Quinn and Patricia continued to hike and camp in the backcountry after she had recovered. Regarding what actions the government officials took toward the sow and her cubs, I could find no source indicating that anything was done to them at all. As far as I found, no action was taken against the bears. The sow's attack was deemed a defensive attack and within the expected behavior of a bear defending her cubs. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think if Patricia had been carrying a firearm, this attack may have been prevented? Why do you think the bear didn't hear Patricia's bear bells and flee? Would you expect a single swat from a brown bear to do so much damage to a human face? What would you feel if you were left with an injured spouse among 7 brown bears until help arrived? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Special thanks to Shelby Rice 1014 for suggesting that I create this episode. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.